I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage. But the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No, no room for hate. No room for hate. You can wave a flag above it, you can quote a verse or two, you can dress it up like justice till it almost sounds like truth. But outrage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can't stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start where the anger breaks.
Where the anger breaks.
Let healing rise up where the hurt gives way.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
No, no room for hate.
No room for hate.
Not in Jesus' name. Oh, not in this house. Not in this heart. Not in His name. No room for hate.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight, entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST, the future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
Celebrity designer Jeff Lewis is back with Hollywood House Lift.
I'm excited to be working with new clients.
I'm not getting rid of that.
I hope I never see you both again.
An all-new season.
Those have to go. That has to go.
From oh, wow,
It's been an actual nightmare.
to oh, wow.
This is such an upgrade.
With celebrities like Josh Duhamel, Christina Ricci, and Gina Rodriguez. Dance with me, Jeff.
It looks like Chuck E. Cheese.
Stream an all-new season of Hollywood House Lift with Jeff Lewis. Now streaming on Freevee.
In uncertain times, we could use someone to lean on. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma will stand by you with plan options to fit your budget. If you've recently lost your job, had a baby, or moved, you can still get the healthcare coverage you and your family need. Financial help may be available for those who qualify. Call 855-452-BLUE or visit hereforyouok.com to see if you're eligible to enroll. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma, a division of Healthcare Service Corporation, a mutual legal reserve company.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Got a vendetta. Coffee tastes like bad decisions I ain't made yet. Boss man talking about we got her, and that means me, brother. Afraid I got a terminal case of the I don't want us. Mind checked out, heart ain't in the building. That second hand's crawling like it hates my guts. The man treating rich like it's a sin. Even God took a beat. So Suck it.
Thank God it's Friday, punching out loud. Hands in the air, middle finger to 9 to 5. Still waiting, but tonight I don't care. Cold beer sermon and the bar stool prayer. Take this job and shove it, I quit. Till Monday, cause tonight I'm free. Yeah, work and wait. It ain't owning me. So raise 'em up high. Let the whistle blow. Thank God it's Friday. That's all I know. HR in the break room sounding like a preacher, talking about culture smiles and being team players. Clipboard dreams on the fluorescent light, selling hours of my life just to make it to Friday night. Got dirt on my jeans, and grease on my hands, clock more over than quality plans. But when that bell rings, it's a holy sound. Feel like change hit the floor when it echoes around. I ain't lazy, I just work my fill. If rest is a sin, guess I always will. Thank God it's Friday, punching out live. Hands in the air, middle finger to 9 to 5. Bill still waiting, but tonight I don't care. Cold beer sermon and a bar stool prayer. Take this job and shove it, I quit. Till Monday, cause tonight I'm free. Yeah, work and wait. It ain't on me. So raise 'em up high. Let the whistle blow. Thank God it's Friday. That's all I know. Boss can have Monday, God on Sunday, but Friday night's mine. I ain't giving it away. I earned this beer, I earned this pay, earned every sip I'm about to take. Thank God it's Friday, punching out alive. Hands in the air, middle finger to 9 to 5. Bill still waiting, but tonight I don't care. Cold beer sermon and a bar stool prayer. Take this job and shove it, I quit. Till Monday, cause tonight I'm free. Yeah, work and wait. It ain't on me. So raise 'em up high. Let the whistle blow. Thank God it's Friday. That's all I know.
And welcome into the program, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies, it's been a bit of a morning already, and I have to open with some news that I was really hoping I'd never have to open with, but here we go. Give me just a moment because this is gonna stay on the screen probably throughout most of the show when I am talking about stuffs. Yeah, right here. We'll just actually, I guess I want it to be, we'll do this. Maybe that'll work better. I don't know. I don't really like any way that I'm doing this, but I know I'm going to put the QR code over my head, not his. All right. So, this is not something that I was hoping that I hoped I would ever have to use this show for, but here we go. So I have a missing person that I need all of my Oklahoma listeners to be on the lookout for. This is kind of urgent. This young man is 20 years old and he's autistic. There has been a Casey alert issued for 20-year-old Michelangelo Garrett did not return home last night from his job near Northwest 50th and May Avenue. Mr. Garrett has a condition that requires regular attention. He was last seen wearing a red Five Guys hat with white lettering, a red Five Guys t-shirt, black pants, and a blue jean jacket. If you have info on his whereabouts, call 911 immediately. That is, again, there's been a Casey alert issued. Yes, he's 20 years old, but he is autistic. Work, and I'm not going to say who they are because it's already all over this post, released him early without notifying his parents. Their stance is, well, he's 20 years old. My stance is, but he's autistic. So, yeah, anyway, been missing since 8 p.m. And I don't want to put too fine a point on this, and I'm not trying to worry mom if she's listening, but this puts us over 14 hours into what anybody else who used to do the kind of work, or who still does the kind of work that I used to do, this would be considered 14 hours into a potential first 48 situation. So if you have seen him or know anything, please call 911 immediately. All right. So again, I know it's a bit unusual, but I'm going to have that on the screen throughout the show today for the most part, because I think it's important. And besides, nobody really wants to see my face anyway. Let's be real. But okay. So we do have lots of other stuff to talk about. We'll be, like I said, I'm going to leave this on the screen as much as possible, and probably come back to it at least a couple times throughout the show. Hopefully, at some point, we'll be able to report some good news. At least that's what I'm praying for. However, that's not, like I said, that was not what was on my radar for today. So we have lots of other stuff, local and otherwise, and I'm gonna come back to this local thing in a minute, but I got to talk about this. So and we'll get into more detail with this later, because I have a huge problem. So Oklahoma is about to put on the ballot to raise our minimum wage, and of course, everybody who's making minimum wage thinks it's a lovely, wonderful idea. If you guys not been paying attention to what's going on in commie failure, otherwise formerly known as California, because they keep raising their minimum wage out there, and all they keep doing is shrinking their workforce. Look, I get it, but you guys seem to be coming at this from what I would consider a full-on potential logic fallacy. I don't think there should be a minimum wage at all. We don't need one anymore, because you can't pay somebody zero or they won't take the job. It's not that complicated. All right. So, again, welcome in. It is Friday. We try to have a little bit more fun on Friday, but it really isn't shaping up to be a fun show. But it does also mean that by the time we get to the end of this thing, I promise we will find something ridiculous enough to remind us that America is still America, Hollywood is still Hollywood, and late night television is still out there for now, yelling into the void like a resistance podcast with a studio audience. Hey, feeling seen and a little attacked there. But before the Friday fun, we have a bit of a serious theme running through today's show, and unfortunately, right before airtime, I got a little more serious, which is why you're seeing the Kelsey alert on my screen right now. The rules matter right up until the rules stop up. Wow. Pardon me while I try not to die on the air. The rules matter right until they stop helping the people who keep lecturing everybody else about democracy, institutions, norms, and the sacred machinery of government. Then suddenly the rules become outdated. The courts become illegitimate. The voters become confused. The audience becomes dangerous. The process becomes the problem. So that's gonna have to be the recurring thread for today's show, because in Virginia, when Democrats lost a redistricting fight because the state Supreme Court said they did not follow the state constitution's process, they lost their minds. And then some Democrats started talking about changing the court, changing judicial terms, or targeting justices who ruled, in their opinion, what was the wrong way. The DNC has also released a 2024 autopsy, and somehow the body on the table does not appear to include Joe Biden's age, the cover-up around Joe Biden's age, or the fact that voters were told not to believe their lying eyes when it came to, yes, you guessed it, Joe Biden's age and his mental capacity. Iranian officials are reportedly talking about assassination bounties, while Secretary of State Marco Rubio is at NATO, reminding allies that alliances are supposed to work for everybody involved, not just them, and not just function as a group project where America does all the work. And I know We did it to ourselves at the end of World War II, but it's about time somebody finally told them, hey, this was fun while it lasted, gents, but you got to get into the ball game here. The Supreme Court reopened the door for a company whose Cuban property was seized by the Castro regime to seek damages from cruise lines that later used those docks. New York is trying to tie the hands of ICE agents or as we call them now around here, nice agents, while local officials are saying, not in my county. Senate Republicans are trying to prove that even when Republicans have some power, they can still act like the minority party with better parking, which is kind of their whole thing, because that's all they want to do. They want to fundraise. So they love being in the PowerPoint of things, because then they get closer parking spaces, better deals, but then they act like they're the minority party most of the time anyway. Back to commie failure for a minute, because California politics is apparently being run by fake accounts, paid influencers, and manufactured online consensus. And I don't mean the LA mayor race either. Well, at least not part of it anyway. And then, because it's Friday, we're going to cleanse the palate with a little bit of Hollywood and late night television that are busy discovering once again that if you mock your audience long enough, eventually the audience finds something else to do. So there's your map today: courts, consequences, national security, law enforcement, Republican dysfunction, fake consensus, and a Friday culture close. So let's get into it. So again, we're going to have to start in Virginia, because this story is almost too perfect for the larger point that we're trying to make today. Virginia Democrats wanted a new congressional map, not just a little adjustment. We're talking about a map that could have shifted the state's congressional delegation dramatically in Democrats' favor. According to AP reporting on the issue, the U.S. Supreme Court's later action said the map could have given Democrats a chance to pick up 4 seats. Now, if you want to make a political argument for redistricting, make the political argument. If you want to put something in front of voters, go ahead. But the Virginia Constitution has a process. It has steps. It has these things called rules, which, funnily, the Democrats always forget about when they don't get what they want out of the rules. And the Supreme Court of Virginia said the process Democrats used did not comply with the state constitution. That's the key right there. And here's the not so fine point that a lot of folks are talking about, because the issue is you can't put an initiative on a ballot within so many days of an election that is supposed to have been started. And thanks to the Democrats in Virginia wanting this really, 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 really long mail-in voting process, they got hoisted on their own petard. But that's the key. This was not the court saying redistricting is verboten. This was not the court saying voters never get to weigh in. This was the court saying you do not get to fast track a constitutional change after the process has already moved into a stage where the Constitution says you cannot do that thing in that particular way. So in other words, they did not lose because democracy died, but that's what they want you to think. They lost because the Constitution of their own state had the nerve to still be in the room and said, no, you can't do that. And their reaction tells you just about everything. According to Red State Sister Told You, who has followed up on this, and this is where the story goes from legal fight into something much more revealing, shall we say. After the ruling, Democrats reportedly floated ideas like lowering the mandatory retirement age for the Virginia Supreme Court, or as I've started calling them, the SCOVA, because it's just easier to say, justices from 75 to 54. 54. That would mean that if I were on that court by next year, I would have to retire. That would have forced out every single justice on the court. Not most of them, not some of them, but all of them. Then the Democrat-controlled General Assembly could have filled the vacancies with friendlier lawyers. Can you imagine if Republicans lost a court fight and then held an emergency meeting where somebody said, you know what we should do? We're gonna lower the retirement age on every judge who ruled against us. And then they're gonna suddenly be gone. The words constitutional crisis would appear on CNN, all over their Chiron, on the backsplash screens. It would be everywhere. They'd have pictures of the American flag on fire and constitutional crisis, and probably an American flag with the Constitution overlaid on it. Both of those on fire, people screaming and yelling, people with hair on fire, talking about constitutional crises. And I can't even imagine what PMS Now would do. Good Lord. But again, the words constitutional crisis would be everywhere. But it gets better or worse, depending on whether you're trying to maintain blood pressure. This is not going to be a good show for my blood pressure, by the way. So if you have blood pressure meds and you've forgotten to take them, you might want to do so now. Also, you should have emergency duct tape in your drawer at work. You probably want to do that too. Just saying. Yeah, we can't have splody heads at work. Come on. And hopefully you've got your earbuds in too. So Dan Hammer, a Virginia Democrat, or Del Dan Hammer, a Virginia Democrat, reportedly said the General Assembly would need to reform the state's top court and judicial appointment process, including term limits, ethics rules, because everybody knows they followed their ethics rules, but you didn't like the outcome, and possibly adding new justices. Then came the line, "We will make sure that Justice Kelsey does not serve anymore come this January." Justice D. Arthur Kelsey authored the opinion. By the way, he's a Democrat, just so everybody knows. This is not subtle. This is not hidden in legalese. This is a politician saying the quiet part out loud, and that is, if you don't bend your knee to us, we're going to take you out of your knees. And saying out loud that a justice who ruled the wrong way should be removed from service. This is where the whole defending democracy routine starts to look more like an Abbott and Costello bit. Or maybe a hostage scene from like SWAT or something. Anyway, because if the court rules your way, it is democracy. If the court rules against you, it is reform time. If the map helps you, it's all about fairness. If the process blocks you, process becomes an obstacle to the will of the people. And if a judge writes the opinion you do not like, then maybe that judge should start thinking about his future. That's not respect for institutions. That is trying to put the judiciary on a shock collar. Now, I have advocated for shock collars for politicians, especially during debates. Not necessarily so much for judicial ones, though. But this is why the court fights matter beyond one state and one map. Once elected officials decide courts are only legitimate when they deliver the desired political outcome, you are not talking about judicial reform anymore. You're talking about leverage. You're telling every judge in the state, nice robe you got there. Shame if your career depended on a vote from people whose map you just blocked. That's not democracy. That's not separation of powers. That's the mob walking into your courtroom with a nice little masthead saying, yeah, we're in charge now, and nice robe there. Be ashamed if something happened to it. Now, to be clear, judicial reform is not automatically bad. There have been several times on this program where I have called for legitimate judicial reform. However, while there are legitimate debates to have about how judges are selected, how long they serve, what ethical standards they follow, and how transparent the process should be, but again, context matters, and if your whole reason for wanting to have them thrown out, well, they gave an opinion that I don't like, and they didn't let us have our 9-1 district grab, so we need to get rid of them, and we should do so like yesterday. Because here's the thing. Yes, this is a point that I have been driving home to all of the Virginia folks that keep winding up in my feed. You know the voters passed it, right? Yeah, but it wasn't eligible to be put on the ballot based on your own rules. And here's the kicker. Yes, the voters supposedly passed it, but they passed it more on the 6 to 5 lines that everybody's saying should be their actual map, which kind of makes everything a little weird, doesn't it? So if you want court reform after a long, serious public debate about accountability, fine, make the case. But if the court reform suddenly becomes urgent 5 minutes after the court stops your preferred political map or your preferred political outcome, voters should get very suspicious very quickly. And this will bring us home to Oklahoma after the break. We've got some local story stuff. So we're going to take a quick break again. You guys will notice the Kelsey alert is going to be on my screen all show to try to give everybody as much of a chance to find any information. And if you see anything about Michelangelo, please make sure you call 911 immediately. Again, my name is Rick Robinson. This is my show. As we normally do on Fridays, we're going to do our tribute songs. First one is going to be for local law enforcement. We'll be back after this music break. Stay tuned.
comes in, somebody answers. Day or night, they're already moving. Calm voices, fast hands, doing the work while the rest of the world freezes. From a headset to a truck, from a badge to a door, they don't stop to count the cost. They step in when it matters. It's not about being seen, it's about being there. They're holding the line when the lines go dead, standing their ground when the world goes dark. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line through the fire, the flood. When everything falls, they don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. Before the sirens fade, before the scene is clear, someone's already making sense of the moment. Keeping people alive, keeping things from getting worse. Some run toward danger, some stay behind and hold it together. Different roles, same weight, same promise to show up. When everything's on the line, they're already there. They're holding the line when the lines go dead, standing their ground when the world goes dark. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line through the fire, the flood. When everything falls, they don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. This is service, this is sacrifice, this is how lives are saved. No spotlight, no applause, just showing up again and again. They're holding the line when the world goes dark. When everything's breaking, they hold their ground. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line. So we raise our voices for the ones who stand. Every voice, every badge, every helping hand. They don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. Always standing in the gap for us all. For those who run and for those who hold steady, for those who stand in the gap.
And welcome back into the program, ladies and gentlemen. Just a quick reminder, we have an active Kelsey alert. Be on the lookout for the following. 20-year-old Michelangelo Garrett, who did not return home last night from his job after being released early from work without notifying his parents, which wouldn't normally be a big deal for a 20-year-old, except he's autistic. He was last seen near 50th and May Avenue. Mr. Garrett has a condition that requires regular attention. He was last seen wearing a red Five Guys hat with white lettering, a red Five Guys t-shirt, black pants, and blue jeans jacket. If you have any information on his whereabouts, call 911 immediately. And again, thank you for your attention to this matter. Not to sound like Donald Trump for a second, but it was really the only way that I could think of to close that out. Anyway, so back into the program. And again, that will remain on the screen throughout the show, just because that's how much this kind of stuff still matters to old guys like me who used to chase bad guys for a living. Anyway, so again, before we went to break, we were going to bring things home to Oklahoma, not just because of Michelangelo, but because of other stuff that's going on, because there's weird things afoot in Oklahoma too. So this is going to bring us home to Oklahoma, because before we pretend court structure fights are just a Virginia problem, Oklahoma voters have a judicial process question coming their way too. State question 845 is set for the November 2026 ballot. Ballotpedia describes it as a proposed constitutional amendment changing the Judicial Nominating Commission, including district-based appointment requirements, allowing commissions to serve 2 consecutive 6-year terms, and removing the provision limiting the commission to no more than 3 members from one political party. So no, State Question 845 is not the same thing as what Virginia Democrats are talking about. Oklahoma voters will get to debate the merits, but the principle is the same. When politicians start changing the machinery around courts, voters need to ask one simple question. Are they trying to improve our justice system, or are they trying to improve their odds? Because every court system has problems. Every appointment system can be debated, but if the goal is to make judges more accountable to law, that is one conversation that deserves to be had. If the goal is making judges more obedient to politicians, that is a completely different conversation. And I don't care what the letter is behind your name when we start having that conversation. But if that's the one you want to have, then we need to bring it out into the light and let everybody talk about it. And that is where the Virginia becomes a warning flare or a carnival full of red flags, depending on your perspective. The moment a political class decides process is only sacred when it produces power, the rest of us better start reading the fine print. Coming up next, the Democratic Party finally releases an autopsy of 2024, and somehow the autopsy forgets to mention the giant obvious thing everybody saw lying on the table. This is where I was actually supposed to take the break, which is why I wasn't even paying attention and read the break toss that I had noted to remind myself to take a break, because sometimes I forget. But I didn't forget this time, so we went early. Anyway, so without further ado, let's talk about that whole DNC autopsy. In the words of Quincy, yeah, there's something not going right here for this autopsy. So from Virginia Democrats being mad that the court noticed the Constitution and actually, followed it, we move to the National Democratic Party being mad that voters eventually, somehow, finally noticed Joe Biden. But before we get into that, this is a much bigger problem than this is going to allude to, because it's not just Joe Biden. Yeah, that's a big issue. It really is. But we talked about this a little bit last night. The Democrats are underwater with their own people. Their approval rating is currently sitting at 46%, which puts them underwater. The problem is the 50 some odd percent that disapprove of them don't disapprove of them for the same reason that you and I do. They disapprove of them because they don't feel like they have become radical enough. And if you haven't been paying attention, look at what's happened in New York City. Look at the socialist mayors here and there that have gotten shots. Look at how much they've ran cities into the ground. Look at Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has been under Democratic rule now for decades, and nothing has ever gotten any better. Same with places like Detroit. So they keep blaming us. They keep saying they're the ones that can fix everything. But I say that things are a little bit different when you look at the receipts, because what happens is Republicans, who have only gotten to control everything a handful of times versus the Democrats, start turning the economy around, and then people get impatient, or Republicans do or say something stupid, kind of like what we're watching happen right now, by the way, and we'll get into that later too. And then they give we tried, we gave them 2 years, they really didn't get anything done, and we're going to give things back to you guys. And then 2 years after that, usually a Democratic president gets elected, and then they start taking credit for all of the work Republicans put in to fix the economy, because our economy is a behemoth and turns like a cruise ship, not a speedboat. But they always get the credit because things start improving while they're the ones in office. Anyway, so back to the autopsy report, and then I have another little side note on there too, because again, this isn't just the Joe Biden problem. So the DNC's 2024 autopsy report is, of course, out, and according to Matt Vespa from Town Hall, the thing runs a whopping 192 pages. I'm going to say that again, 192 pages. That's not a memo. That's not a post-election. Dude, that is like that's like a political thesis. You could use that thing as a doorstop. It can be a doorstop with footnotes. That's insane. You don't need 102 pages to say why things are broken. Again, Joe Biden should have never been their nominee. Then again, neither should Hillary Clinton. The only reason Hillary Clinton got the nomination way back in 2016 is because the Democrats didn't like the fact that people kept picking people that the powers that be within the Democratic Party didn't like. So they created superdelegates. You know who would have been president? Probably not once, but twice if it were up to the Democrats. None other than we have to tax the billionaires, Bernie Sanders, because he was in the lead until the superdelegates gave it to Kankles. He was in the lead in 2020 as well until they gave it to the cauliflower in chief. Again, the superdelegates. So it's not like the Democrats have not ever cheated. They cheat all the time. They change the rules to suit the things that they want. And then we watch them do that. And then we're like, when is our side going to do that? And we've been talking about that off and on now for over a year because the filibuster needs to go away. If they're just going to use it as a snooze alarm where somebody just be 60 votes, that's not how that works. Not how that's supposed to work. If you think something deserves a filibuster, then you organize yourself and anybody else that you want to come down and have a discussion in the well of the Senate about the thing. And then when you guys run out of gas, then it goes for a vote. The whole thing with a filibuster used to be there were two ways to stop it. One, you could shut them up early if you got 60 votes to tell them to sit down and shut them up, or you waited till they were out of gas, then you did a simple up or down 51-49 vote. We don't do that anymore. We have these blue slips when it comes to judicial nominees. And trust me, the Republicans love those blue slips and that snooze button just as much as the Democrats do. That's why they don't want it gone. But and this is the other problem. The only way that we're ever going to be able to fix this mess is if we start being able to see who's voting for what, especially when it's an 85-15 issue, and they keep being able to, like this whole, Save America Act thing is. Seriously. Did I mention this was not going to be a good show for my blood pressure? Anyway, so the whole Save America Act thing, we're going to be getting into that too, because John Thune, and I knew this was going to happen as soon as his pick for the Senate was basically potentially ousted because Donald Trump just gave the other guy his endorsement. Anyway, I guess I should get back to the autopsy thing so we can stay in order here. So the glaring omission, according to everything that was reported in this 192-page monstrosity, they highlighted in that piece all the things that mattered except one. The report does not seriously deal with Joe Biden's age or the party's strategic decision to shield him from a public that already thought he was too old to keep serving. AP, again, this is AP, also described the report as a long-awaited, still incomplete DNC review into what went wrong in 2024, released after internal pressure and criticism became too much for them to be able to bear. This, coming from the AP, is almost impressive. But it's even more impressive that they did this so-called autopsy and then left the cause of death off the report. Because this autopsy is like doing one on the Titanic and concluding the problem was insufficient enthusiasm for ICE. Everybody watched this happen. You did not need to be a political consultant. You did not need access to internal polling. You just needed eyes, ears, and the willingness to believe what you were actually seeing. For months, voters were told not to worry. They were told the clips they were being seen were edited, taken out of context, or potentially even deep, or as Sideshow Bob, the former press sec, used to say, these are cheap fakes. Biden was sharp as a tack. He was engaged behind closed doors. He was amazing. He ran circles around his entire team. Actually, you just do not understand how brilliant he is because you weren't allowed in the room. Then he got on the debate stage, and suddenly the entire political press corps had to pretend that it had just discovered fire. The problem was never just Biden's age. The problem was the cover-up around Biden's age. The problem was coming to terms with the fact that we had a first lady that was running the country for most of the 4 years that Joe Biden was in office. And so were a lot of former Obama lackeys. Joe Biden was the perfect tool for Barack Obama, who, again, if you remember, after he left office, said, if I could find a way to run the country from my basement and not have to be the guy in front, hell yeah, I would do it. And then guess what he did? He found a way to run the country from his basement without having to be the guy in front of the camera, and he did. But they don't talk about that part either. The problem was the institutional insistence that everybody outside the bubble was cray-cray. They were cruel, misinformed, or manipulated for noticing what was at the time very plainly visible if you had two working eyes. And I kind of only have one, and I still noticed. Just throwing that out there. In Virginia, the rule was the obstacle in the DNC autopsy. Reality is not reality because it became the obstacle. The party does not want to say we misled voters about the condition of the president of the United States. It does not want to say we attacked people for noticing something we already knew was a problem, but we tried to hide from them. It does not say we trapped ourselves by refusing to have an honest primary conversation and then panicked when the panic became visible. So what you got was 192 pages of consultant language. Instead of the party being honest with itself, instead of the party being honest with its constituents, and instead of admitting, hey, we've actually been doing some shady things for the last few cycles just so we could get our way, and this all blew up on our face, and we're not going to do that anymore, and this is what we should have done. Or if nothing else, they should have held Joe Biden to the reason why the people that voted for him in his first term actually voted for him. I think some of them were just hoping that all the chaos was going to go away. And they didn't realize, even though we kept trying to tell them, that it was the Democrats sowing the seeds of the chaos. If you don't believe me now, just look at everything that's coming out about J6. Look at everything that's coming out about the Southern Poverty Law Center, and you'll understand they were causing the problems on purpose because they knew if they could get people weary and beleaguered, then they would change their vote and go back to the other side. And it sort of kind of worked well enough for them to be able to do some other shenanigans and pull off a few things that I can't say on YouTube because the last time I talked about it on YouTube, they demonetized the video. Anyway, and just for the record, because I do have the disclaimer, fuck you, YouTube. Okay. But they don't want to say that they lied to the voters. They don't want. They can't say that. They can't say that we didn't want to have an honest conversation with you. So instead, you got a whole bunch of consultant language. You get phrases about messaging, misinformation, disinformation, projecting strength, unity, and leadership. Some of that may be true in a very generic way. Candidates do need message discipline. Even Donald Trump occasionally, mostly all the time, needs messages. Oh, wait, did I say that out loud? But yes, even he needs message discipline. Parties do need voter outreach. Rural voters should matter, but to the left, they usually don't. Working class voters should matter, but again, to the left, they normally don't. Minority voters should matter, and they shouldn't be considered owned by either party. But if a minority voter votes against the Democrats, they are suddenly a traitor to their race. Kind of scary language when you think about it. But if the patient, in this instance, the DNC, was struck by a vehicle and the autopsy spends 192 pages discussing cholesterol, at some point, you are avoiding the obvious. The 2024 election was not just a messaging problem, it was a trust problem. And that is, again, why this isn't just the Democratic Congress. This is the entire Democratic Party is underwater on its own side at 46%. Again, voters were told the economy was great while they were paying more for groceries, insurance, rent, utilities, and everything else attached to breathing. Voters were told the border was secure while communities were dealing with the consequences of a border that clearly was not secure. You've now had one of Biden's chief border people come out and say, yeah, I wish we had done something differently with that, because it's obvious that we weren't being honest. Voters were told Biden was fine until the moment those very same people who kept being told, never mind what you're seeing with your own eyes and ears, or seeing with your own eyes and hearing with your own ears, he's fine. And then he blew up. Now, they want to talk about the debate. This actually started, so for those of us that were paying attention, this started almost as soon as he was running for office. He stayed in his basement the entire time. They built, at one point, he was doing press conferences from our public speeches as the president from a fake set. I remember in 2016 when we were all terrified, almost to a person. KLRN radio staff did not want Donald Trump to become president. I'm not ashamed to say that, because if I don't, then I'm lying to you. But that's how much my opinion on this person has evolved. I didn't vote for him in 2016. I did in 2020, and I did again in 2024, because I do firmly believe he is the best choice that we have available right now. And I still believe that to this day. But it took me a minute to get there. And it took me to realize that Never Trump was a nice thing to say, and it made me feel empowered until the day he was sworn in. And then at that point, just like with every other president who was ever elected, for as long as I've been an adult, I tried to get behind him. I tried to root for him. And I started seeing that even if it felt like sometimes he really didn't know what he was doing, as my good friend Amish, otherwise known as Ordinance J. Packard, everybody's favorite Amish attorney, who I do multiple shows with throughout the week, had started calling him the Leslie Nielsen of presidents. Because even if he backs into it sideways, somehow he manages to make it work. And that was when we started noticing, hey, things are actually getting better. The economy was starting to pick back up. I was getting raises, which I hadn't had one in forever. And it wasn't because people were raising the minimum wage. It was because wages were naturally going up. So more money was being shared all the way around. But then Biden came into office, and even though everything was much more expensive, we were being told everything was fine. Even now, the gas prices that they're screaming about now were the high end of what it was when Joe Biden was in office. But this is a temporary situation. This isn't a permanent, a la Barack Obama. We want you paying $5, $6, $7, $8 a gallon so that we can save the penguins and the polar ice caps. Because everybody seems to forget that the same people that are screaming at you about gas prices now were those same ones that were telling you needed to get used to having to pay $5 to $6 a gallon so that we could save the planet. All we're saying is we want low gas prices too, but if it takes higher gas prices for the short term to bring about regime change in Iran and get rid of a group that should have been dealt with on January 22nd, 1981, then I'm kind of okay with that. If we actually get it done. Now, if we've gone through all this and we wind up not making the changes that need to be made, then I'm going to have a problem. But as I talked about on BZ's show last night, we're also running into another situation where there are things that I don't think the cabinet folks took into account when we started this mess. I think they were thinking they were going to be able to pull another Snuggie snatch, and suddenly all the Iranian people were going to be cheering. And yes, most of the Iranian people want their regime gone, regardless of what the regime tells you. You know, you have the regime coming out on X telling everybody how much the Iranian people support them, but none of their people can get online to confirm or deny whether they actually support their regime. So yeah, it's all kabuki theater. But the problem is, and I said this before, we have another huge problem in this country and in the world in general. After World War II, they started tying all the world's economies together. Because remember, they thought World War I was going to be the only one. Remember, it was originally called the War to End All Wars. They thought there was never going to be anything like it again. And here we are about 30 years later, and we're in the middle of another one. Like, it's been barely a generation. We're already doing this again. No, we can't do this anymore. So they started putting together plans to tie everybody's economies together. And this is how well that actually worked. By design, we, one of the largest military powers on the planet, have been forced to fight everything to a stalemate since Korea. Because if we go in and actually knock people's dicks into the dirt anymore, we're going to cause the rest of the world to collapse. And that's another reason why you're seeing the strain and the hiccups that you're seeing right now, because Iran's economy is in the process of collapsing. If they don't come to the table soon, we may go with them for a while. And if you don't believe me, just look up what happened to the world's economy when the little tiny islands of Greece collapsed during, what was it, Obama's second term, I think. But yeah, remember, voters were told the economy was great, but everything was more expensive for all the things. The borders were clearly not secure, and then suddenly he was not fine enough to stay on the ticket. Then Kamala Harris got elevated into a campaign. She was not prepared to run. She lost her entire party, $1.3 billion, with a message nobody could really define because nobody could understand what she was saying, tied to an administration voters already wanted to move away from. And the autopsy apparently wants to talk around all of that. That's not an analysis. That's reputation management. If Democrats really think the problem was mainly misinformation, then the solution becomes more censorship, more narrative control, more pressure on platforms, more experts explaining why ordinary people are wrong. But if the problem was trust, then the solution becomes much harder. You have to stop lying to people. You have to stop insulting them when they notice obvious things. Basket of deplorables comes to mind. You have to stop building campaigns around boutique issues that light up donor class Zoom calls. What was that one group? Men for Kamala Harris or something? Dudes for Kamala, I think. Ooh. I actually got an invite to a couple of those calls incognito just so we could talk about them. Oh. Rudy Hobbit, you suck. Anyway, that is the much deeper autopsy, and it's the things that they really should have been discussing. And I suspect that is the one that they do not want to write and probably never will. Because once you admit the Biden age cover-up mattered, you have to ask who participated in it. You have to ask which journalisms and journalists helped. I know I call them journalisms because reasons. Which officials helped? Which consultants helped? Which cabinet members knew? Which members of Congress smiled for the cameras while privately panicking? That is why it is easier to talk about disinformation. Disinformation is always somebody else's fault. But voters have memories. Voters do not enjoy being told they hallucinated the last 4 years. All right, so we're going to take actually, we got a couple more minutes, so I think we can actually get through the Iran stuff before we take the break. So this is kind of where we are right now, and this is kind of why I'm looking at everything going, yeah, maybe we will save this for after the break, because this segment is going to be one that I have to call the following: When Terrorism Gets a Committee Vote. Since we are doing the military tribute now, I'll go ahead and take the break now. Because this one's a bit long, but it's also cool, and we wrote it, so I like it. I like it. I love it. Oh wait, sorry. Oh yeah, we got so Colbert's done. Stick a fork in him, but we got some fun stuff to talk about at the end of hour 2. So hopefully we'll have time to get into that. So hang on. But here comes, without further ado, the KLR Radio Players rendition and arrangement for a military tribute song that doesn't get us in trouble on YouTube. So here we go.
Before the oath was spoken out loud, before you stood apart from the crowd, there was a moment, quiet and clear, when you chose to stand while others stayed here. You raised your hand with a steady resolve, knowing some nights don't end when the mission's done. Not for glory, not for the pay, but for something worth more than walking away. Only hold the line. They carried the weight where the roads ran long, through dust and heat when the days went on, holding ground mile after after mile, doing the work that rarely drew a smile. They stood their post when relief ran late, shoulders squared under the pull of fate. Not chasing headlines, not asking why, just staying put when others pass by. We stand and watch in different ways, different nights, the same long days. One old spoken carried through, wherever duty calls us to. Maybe we stand watch over the deep. They kept their watch where the water turns black, miles from shore with no quick way back, measuring time by the rise and the fall, answering duty's unrelenting call. Through silent hours and endless seas, they stood their post in the cold night breeze, guarding the lanes the world depends on, so others slept and the light stayed on. We stand the watch in different ways, different nights, the same long days. One old spoken carried through, wherever duty calls us to. Simplify Marine, we go where we're sent. We go where we're sent. They moved as one when the moment came, side by side through fire and rain. First to step where the ground was thin, not for the odds but for the ones beside them. Trust was earned in the hard way through, every promise carried by the few. No turning back once the line was crossed. They stood shoulder to shoulder as brothers, never counting the cost. We stand the watch in different ways, different nights, the same long days. One old spoken carried through, wherever duty calls us to. Air Force, the sky is our domain. Air Force, the sky is our domain. They held their focus where seconds seem eternal, soaring between clouds and blue. Every movement measured and true, knowing what one clean moment could do. They watch the whole while guarding the small, every mission tied to a larger call. Calm under pressure, steady and clear, keeping the promise from far overhead. Space Force, we guard the dark without faith. They keep their vigil where silence reigns, beyond the weather, beyond the rain, watching the paths that the world relies on, long before the warning lights come on. No cloud, no banners, no clear view, just constant care in a canvas full of stars. Standing the watch through the endless night, guarding the systems that keep us in light. While the watch is kept and the lines hold fast, they're alive, still moving on the other side of that. Empty chairs and quiet phones, long goodbyes that don't feel done. Names we carry but never say, folded flags and debts we pay. Every service, every scar reaches farther than the uniform ever could. Coast Guard, we come when it matters most. They launch into storms when hope feels thin, turning back isn't an option then. Hands reach out where the waters rise, pulling lives back from the edge of time. No headlines waiting when the call is done, just breathing restored and another life won. Every rescue, every return, a quiet promise kept in promise to remember those who serve, those who stand watch still, and those who never came home.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight, entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST, the future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLR.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Got a vendetta. Coffee tastes like bad decisions I ain't made yet. Boss man talking about we got her, and that means me, brother. Afraid I got a terminal case of the I don't want us. Mind checked out, heart ain't in the building. That second hand's crawling like it hates my guts. The man treating rich like it's a sin. Even God took a beat. So, suck it. Thank God it's Friday. Punching out loud. Hands in the air. Middle finger to 9 to 5.
All right, as much as I love that one, I usually like to try to let it play. We got a lot of show left and not much clock to get it in. So, again, just as a reminder, if you are just tuning in, we have an alert out for none other than Michelangelo Garrett, who has been missing since 8 p.m. last night. And hang on, I am fighting with my system here. One moment, please. Trying to see if I can make that any bigger, but it's not really going to let me. Maybe if I do that, maybe. No, doesn't really help. All right. So anyway, I was trying to embiggen it a bit, but hang on, let me get it pulled back up again so I can just read it from my screen because I have it elsewhere. All right. So 20-year-old Michelangelo Garrett did not return home last night from his job, Five Guys, near Northwest 50th and May Avenue, Five Guys. Mr. Garrett has a condition that requires regular attention. He was last seen wearing a red Five Guys hat with white lettering, a Five Guys t-shirt, black pants, and blue jean jacket. He was also released from work early without notification of his parents. The management's position was, dude's 20 years old. Parents' position is, he has autism, you idiots. However, if you have any information on his whereabouts, please call 911 immediately. Consider this going out to anyone in Oklahoma or the surrounding states because, like I said, at this point, he has been missing now for over 16 hours. So by vehicle, he could be anywhere within a 16-hour radius by now. So if you see him, I mean, please call 911. Parents are distraught. But only way I can really put it, parents are distraught. Anyway, all right. So we do have lots of other things that we do need to get into, however, for the remainder of the show, since we've already done all the political stuff, all the tribute stuff, we may not take another break. Because I have been interrupting a lot to make sure people are aware of the situation with Michelangelo. All right. So anyway, back to the prepared portion of the program. And as we talked about before the break, this is more on the whole situation with Iran. This is polling notes from PJ Media's Catherine Salgado, who's reported that Iranian parliament figures are discussing or drafting legislation that would offer a reward of 50 million euros for assassinating Donald John Trump. The piece also says the measure is aimed at multiple U.S. and Israeli leaders, including Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, let's be careful with the wording. I'm not saying this has been enacted as final law, but I'm pretty sure it probably has been. We haven't been able to get confirmation of that, however, which is why I have to say it this way. The safe wording here is that Iranian officials are reportedly discussing or drafting legislation around an assassination reward. But even that, in my opinion, is outrageous enough. When a regime starts debating assassination bounties in parliament, that's not diplomacy with a translation problem. That's terrorism by committee vote. And the timing matters because while this story is circulating, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is at a NATO foreign ministers meeting in Helsingborg, Sweden. Reuters reports Rubio said NATO has to be good for everyone involved and that allies need a clear understanding of expectations. He also reportedly called any Iranian tolling system in the Strait of Hormuz completely unacceptable. That sounds simple enough, but it's actually a pretty important message. For years, the American argument about NATO has been this: alliances matter, but alliances cannot mean America pays the bill. America absorbs the risk. America provides the muscle, and everybody else sends strongly worded statements and occasional cheese baskets. And this is what I've been talking about all along. And again, we did this to ourselves after World War II. We took it upon ourselves to become the Atlas figure of the world. We came out of World War II much better than most everybody else in the Western Hemisphere. So we decided, because it would help with our sphere of influence, to put our money and our might behind rebuilding the rest of the Western world and helping to form alliances. The problem is, much like the don't feed the bear signs, eventually, if you start providing everybody with everything they need to be able to take care of themselves and you're doing it for them, that makes their money fungible and they start being able to use it on other things other than defense because they know that you're going to come to their rescue. NATO is not supposed to be a European security blanket, looking at you, Linus, with an American taxpayer tag still hanging off of it. And this is where the Rubio NATO story connects to Iran. If Iran is threatening shipping lanes, if Russia is pressuring Europe, if the Middle East is unstable, if China is watching all of it and doing the math, then the question is not whether alliances matter. Of course they matter. The question becomes, if alliances can still be considered alliances. Do our allies share the burden? Do they meet defense commitments? Do they take threats seriously before America has to drag them into the spotlight and make them serious? Do they help deter conflict, or do they wait for Washington to manage the consequences? This is why foreign policy cannot be reduced to slogans that can fit on bumper stickers. You can want America to avoid endless wars and still understand that weakness invites aggression. You can want allies to pay more and still understand that alliances can and do deter enemies. You can be skeptical of foreign entanglements and still recognize that if hostile regimes believe there is no price for threats, plots, and terrorism, they tend to escalate. The choice is not between being the world's policeman and being the world's doormat. There is a middle ground called deterrence. Deterrence means your enemies know there are lines that they cannot cross. Deterrence means your allies know they have responsibilities that you're going to hold them to. Deterrence also means America does not bluff for fun, but also does not apologize for having power and using it when necessary. And this brings us back to the assassination bounty reporting. If Iranian officials are openly floating rewards for killing American and Israeli leaders, that's not just rhetoric, that's a test. That's a red line we should never allow them to pass. And I'm just going to say this again, parking lot, just saying. They are testing our resolve. They are testing consequences. They are testing whether the West still has the ability to distinguish between negotiation and extortion. That is where Rubio's message at NATO matters. An alliance that cannot define its own purpose in the face of threats is not an alliance at all. It is a press conference with pretty flags. So yes, this is foreign policy, but it is also part of today's theme. Rules, institution, and alliances only work if serious people hold all of those things to account and actually enforce the rules, institutions, and alliances that we're discussing. If the rules become optional, if the courts become partisan targets, if parties lie to voters, if hostile regimes threaten assassination and the free world responds with process language, then the system starts looking hollow. And hollow systems invite pressure, and hollow systems, much like hollow bones, don't do a very good job of standing up to pressure. All right, so we're going to stay with the courts and consequences, but this time the story stretches back to the Castro regime. They seized property there's involving cruise lines and a Supreme Court ruling that says communism does not get to erase the receipts. So the next story is one of those legal stories that sounds narrow at first, but the more you sit with it, the more it becomes a morality play. The Supreme Court has handed down an 8-1 ruling involving Havana Docks Corp, cruise lines and property seized by the Castro regime after the Cuban Revolution. The AP has reported the court sided with Havana Docks, whose property was seized more than 65 years ago, and revived claims against Carnival, Norwegian, Royal Caribbean, and MSC over the use of confiscated property when docking in Havana. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote for the majority, and the case returns for further proceedings. According to Red State's Bob Hoge, he lays out the basic history. Havana Docks had a long-term property agreement to operate docks in Havana, Cuba. Castro's communist government took control of those said docks in 1960 without compensation. And decades later, major cruise lines are still using those docks or use those docks for travel to Cuba. Now, I know Havana Docks, cruise lines, property interest, federal statute doesn't sound like the sexiest Friday radio topic, but it matters because it's about something very basic. Can a communist regime steal private property, wait long enough, let other businesses profit from it, and then have everyone shrug because the paperwork didn't go through? The Supreme Court said, yeah, not so much. Communism always starts with promises about fairness and ends with somebody else holding the deed to your dock. Anyway, and that is not just a joke. That's the pattern. Revolutionary moments love language about the people. They love talking about justice, equality, solidarity, and liberation. But once they have power, somehow, the people never seem to get the property. The state gets it. The party gets it. The favorite insiders get access. The original owners get a lecture. And before you say this doesn't really have anything to do with us, I would like to remind you that one of the favorite lines of part of the more extreme part of the Democratic Party is you will own nothing and you will like it. How do you think that's going to happen? for the people that already own property. They're going to confiscate it. It's exactly what we're talking about right now. And in this situation, decades later, somebody tells the victims it's time to move on. This is why property rights should matter, not because property is more important than people, but because property rights are one of the ways free societies protect people from government power overreach. If the government can take what you own without compensation, without due process, and without consequences, then you didn't really own anything in the first place. You're borrowing it from whoever has the guns and the paperwork. And I would say the same is true about property taxes. Nowhere else in this country do you have to continue to pay taxes on something once it's paid for. Now, I can understand property taxes being built into the price of your loan. I can understand that there's property taxes that you have to pay while you're paying the bank back for giving you the money to buy your house. I don't understand why property taxes are still a thing once a piece of property is supposedly paid for. And I'm not saying that just because I'm getting close to the age where property is going to be being paid for and I will have property taxes I still have to pay for the rest of my life. I'm saying that, taxation is supposed to have limits. But we'll save that part for another show later. Because what we're talking about right now is the whole you don't really own it because basically you've leased it from whoever can come take it away from you anytime you want. This is true in Cuba and it's true anywhere else. This ruling also shows why the courts should still matter. Earlier, we talked about Virginia, where politicians are furious that a court-enforced process. Here we have the U.S. Supreme Court dealing with the long shadow of confiscation and saying there may still have to be consequences here. The court is not supposed to be a political vending machine. You do not put in your preferred ideology and get the ruling you want. The court is supposed to read the law, apply the law, and then make people follow it, including forcing powerful people to live with the legal consequences. And sometimes those consequences can and do take a long time. And this, believe it or not, in a very practical but roundabout way, is going to bring us right back to Oklahoma. Law is not just where politicians say at what politicians say at a podium. Law is what gets written, signed, vetoed, challenged, interpreted, and eventually enforced. According to KGOU, there are reports that Oklahoma lawmakers sent Governor Kevin Stitt around 500 bills after wrapping the 2026 legislative session, and he had already signed more than half of them as of the time of that report. That's a lot of lawmaking, or at least a lot of paper moving. The legislature has left town, which means now we find out what was actually lawmaking and what was just paper migration, because every bill has a life after the headline. It might get signed, it may get vetoed, it may become law without much attention, it may get challenged in court, Virginia, it may create new rules somebody has to enforce, may create costs nobody talked about during the debate. And years later, someone may be standing in court asking what the law actually means. That is the connective tissue between Havana Docks and the Oklahoma legislative pile. Law has consequences. Process has consequences. Property rights have consequences. Bad government decisions can and do echo for decades. So when politicians say, don't worry, this is just a technical change, you should read it. When they say this is just fairness, read it twice. When they say this will not affect you, check your wallet, your rights, and your neighbor's wallet. And see what they're using as an enforcement mechanism. Because most of the time, when they tell you it's not going to affect you, it usually does. If you don't believe me, look at the Democrats' usual talking point anytime they talk about new taxes. This has been a talking point they have used since 1914, when they convinced Republicans who got tired of them coming back every 2 years, ever since they got rid of the progressive income tax after the Civil War, saying, hey, you remember when it was really nice when we didn't have to ask people to buy treasury bonds and stuff when we ran short and there were things that we wanted to do? Wasn't that progressive income tax really, really nice? So after decades, the Republicans, kind of like the big dog Spike with the little dog, after knocking it across the face several times, finally said, you know what, fine, we'll just put it to the ballot. And then the Democrats honed the language that they still use to this day. This is a very small tax on a very small part of the population, and you're not even ever going to notice because it doesn't impact you. Because it was a 2% tax on 1% of the country when it was enacted. Is that what it is today? Because, yeah, when they say it's not going to affect you, Make sure you check your wallet and have your neighbor check their wallets too. Because once the law is written, it does not stay in the press release. It moves into this thing we call real life. So the rest of hour 2, as much as we can get through in the next 35-ish minutes, is going to be about enforcement and accountability, because rules that are not enforced just become decoration. New York is trying to restrict cooperation with ICE agents, while local officials say they will not comply. Oklahoma voters are about to decide whether the state should raise its minimum wage. Hint, no. The Senate Republicans are leaving town while priorities pile up. The Republican base is still keeping receipts. California politics is apparently being run by fake accounts and influencer drama, surprising absolutely no one if you know what's really been going on with the internet lately. And then we will get into Hollywood and late night TV, because if America's going to be ridiculous, we might as well enjoy the cleanest laughs available. So let's start with New York. Sanctuary for whom? New York Democrats have passed a sweeping anti-ICE sanctuary style package, and according to Red State's Rusty Weiss, who has the story, according to the piece he put out, the legislation restricts cooperation between local law enforcement and ICE agents, ends 287G agreements, places limits on ICE activity in certain public spaces, and creates an Office of Immigrant Trust under New York Attorney General Letitia Big Booty James. Now, the 287G program matters because it's not just a slogan, it's a formal partnership structure that allows trained state and local law enforcement to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. So when a state tries to end those agreements, that changes how enforcement works on the ground. The Red State piece also highlighted Rensselaer County Executive Steve McLaughlin saying, yeah, not in my county. He says his county will keep working with ICE and stay in the 287-G program. And that is where the fight gets interesting. For years, progressives told us law enforcement was sacred. When it involved investigating Donald Trump, prosecuting Donald Trump, raiding Donald Trump, suing Donald Trump, or subpoenaing someone near Donald Trump. But when law enforcement means enforcing immigration law, suddenly we're all supposed to become constitutional poets discovering the hidden beauty of non-cooperation. Apparently, law enforcement is only sacred when it is investigating Trump. When it is enforcing immigration law, suddenly everybody discovers states' rights and a bit of interpretive dance. Now, supporters of sanctuary policies will tell you this is about trust. They will say immigrant communities need to feel safe interacting with police, reporting crimes, going to hospitals, going to school, and living day-to-day life without fear. Again, I would like to point out they are using words like immigrant communities. Immigration, migration, not the same thing. So they're conflating issues yet again. That argument should be heard, because it should. Public safety does include cooperation from communities. No serious person wants victims afraid to report crimes, but we also need to understand that laws are laws for a reason. And despite the warm, fuzzy feeling the left has regarding our immigration policies, we also have those for a reason. And I've talked about this on this very show before. We have immigration policies because we looked back at everything that happened between the colonists and the indigenous peoples that were here, and we realized that we needed to put processes in place to make sure things like that couldn't happen again. Now you have an entire segment of the population in places like Minnesota that are Islamists, and from places like Somalia that are telling you point blank they have not come here to become part of the American dream. They have not come here to assimilate and bring the best parts of them into the best parts of us and create something together. They are here to colonize. What happened the last time there was a group of people that were here to colonize? This is why these things are important, because there is a huge difference between protecting victims and shielding criminal offenders from lawful federal enforcement. And whether you like it or not, and this is something that I have been yelling at Republicans about for a long time, stop using the language about violent offenders. These people broke our laws to get here. And I'm going to say this for all of you that like to roll your eyes when I say that sentence. Unless you are leaving your car unlocked with the keys in the ignition, unless you are leaving a come-in note on your door with your doors unlocked, note on the front and on the back and on all your windows with them open, and you have a note on the refrigerator saying, come in, take what you want, and a sign on your bathroom door that says, my house is your house, use my facilities, then I don't want to hear anything from you, because you are enforcing your own borders. You have borders that you do not allow people to cross, but you don't think our country should. Big difference. Big difference. So again, there are differences between discretion and obstruction. There's a difference between saying we want witnesses to come forward and saying we're going to make federal immigration enforcement as difficult as possible, even when public safety is involved. And for those of you, well, what about what happened in Minnesota? You know what? If they had contacted ICE and said, hey, this person is being released on this date, please come pick them up, then they would have sent 2 people with a set of handcuffs, walked in, signed him out, put him in the back of a car, took him to his deportation hearing, and it would have been the end of it, but they didn't. So because there were people that were being released back into the population that were in fact illegal migrants with violent criminal histories, they start sending people in to go find them. If you really want your area to be safe, you should be forcing your people that you have voted for to work with ICE on release detainers, especially if you just want the violent ones gone. Because guess what? That would have been their focus. If these cities and states would have worked with them, they would have gone in and just got the ones that were already in jails and started with them. But because they didn't, this opened an entirely different can of worms. Because this is what I would have done in that same situation. If you're going to make me come into your city and your state and find these people, then I'm going to grab everybody I can who is violating our laws while I'm here. And if you don't like it, then you should have worked with us. And whether they like it or not, a lot of the public actually does see the difference. This is why immigration became such a major political issue. It's not because voters are cruel. It is because voters look at a system where the rules are ignored, exceptions become policy, and enforcement becomes controversial, and citizens are told their concerns are bigotry. Case in point, in California, we have hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless on the streets, while a lot of folks that are illegal migrants were getting housed in very expensive hotels and very nice apartment complexes, etc., while Americans are left on the streets. Same thing was happening in New York City. Before the election, you started to see public outcry in places like New York City and Chicago, and even places in California, for everybody who, people of color who feel disaffected, disenfranchised, because, you guys are supposed to be taking care of us and you're taking care of these people instead. Now, a lot of that's been shut down and being silenced now because they want to focus on the racist bigotry side of this stuff, when nothing could be further from the truth. So the short answer is you cannot run a country this way. Eventually, it's going to crumble. You cannot have one set of laws on paper and another set of laws in practice, because those two things are going to tear everything apart. This brings us back to today's theme. Rules matter only if they are enforced. If politicians can decide which federal laws count, depending on their preferred ideology, then the rule of law becomes a branding exercise. So I know we've been doing this a lot today, but we're going to come back home to Oklahoma for a second, because we have a different kind of government requirement question headed to the voters here. State question 832 is on the June 16th, 2026 ballot. So yeah, less than a month. The Oklahoma Election Board's ballot title says the measure would amend the Oklahoma Minimum Wage Act, raise the state minimum wage in steps to $15 per hour by no later than 2029, and then automatically adjust it based on cost of living beginning in 2030. Now, this sounds like a good idea on paper, unless you've ever run a business. And I'm going to get hate mail on this one. I already know I am. But if you think this is a good idea, and again, $15 an hour doesn't seem like very steep, but it's over double what the minimum wage is right now. The other issue is nobody's really being paid that minimum wage anymore. So what happens when kids straight out of, part-time job kids in high school are making $15 an hour? They're going to stop hiring kids in high school. What's going to happen? Some of these places that used to pay minimum wage, that don't anymore, for the most part, were places where kids kids with their work permits, kids in high school, could start getting actual professional work experience. The more we start making businesses mandatorily pay people to give them the opportunity to work there, the less likely we are to get people that don't have any work experience. What happens when you can't get a job anymore? And before you say anything, what happens to all the mom and pop shops? I'm going to say this again. In 1998, I started my own security company. Now, I was having to be able to go in and get contracts and make money. I was having to go in and underbid other people that were more well established than I was. And then minimum wage went up. So I went back to my people that I had contracts with and said, hey, minimum wage has gone up, which means now the guys that I'm paying are making really close to minimum wage now. And because this is a skilled work set, they're not very happy about that. And they would like me to talk to you about potentially, hopefully finding them some more money. What do you think happened most of the time with that? I got told no. This is the problem. All this does, and notice it's almost always the Democrats pushing for things like this. All this does is give more leverage to large corporations over and over and over again. The same people that are telling you they're for small business, they're for mom and pop shops, keep doing everything they can to help squeeze out the mom and pop shops. Because who's going to be able to absorb that cost increase with minimum wage easier? Mom and pop shops or places like Walmart? According to Ballotpedia, they are also saying the proposal would remove certain exemptions from the Oklahoma Minimum Wage Act, bringing categories like part-time employees, certain students and minors, farm and agriculture workers, domestic workers, newspaper vendors, and feed store employees under the measure's definition of employee. So this is not the same as immigration enforcement, obviously, but it is another version of the same big civics question. What should government require? Who decides what they require? And what are the consequences? Everybody likes the sound of higher wages because they do. Of course they do. If you ask people whether workers should make more money, most decent people say yes. The harder question becomes how? Does this raise wages? Does it raise prices? Does it reduce hours? Does it speed up automation? And if you don't believe me that it speeds up automation, I would like to remind you that in Oklahoma right now, minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. Almost no fast food restaurant pays that right now, unless you're a part-time kid in high school. Everybody else is usually making somewhere between $10 and $11 an hour, which I know isn't a lot, but it's still well above minimum wage. But you know what they've done? When's the last time you went into a fast food restaurant and saw more than 3 people working? You know what I've noticed the handful of times I've been to a fast food restaurant lately? They want you to order at the kiosks. There's not even usually somebody standing at the counter waiting for you to order. And if you try, they're like, well, I'm doing this. Can you just go order at the kiosk? I would prefer not to, but since you've asked. Self-checkout in Walmart. Now there's been this big article pushing that in some areas, Walmart's doing away with their self-checkouts. Trust me, it's not because they want to give more checkers jobs. It's because people are stealing from them using those self-checkouts. So again, is this going to raise wages or is it going to raise prices? Let me give you my practical experience. I have lived through 3 minimum wage changes in my life. When I first started working, it was $3.75 an hour. It went to $4.25. Then it went, I guess it's 4 now. Then it went to $4.50, I think, or 5 something. I don't even remember. Then it went to $7.25. Every time minimum wage has gone up through forced edict, prices have followed suit. When it was $3.75 an hour, I was still in college. Was working part-time at McDonald's, if memory serves. And we were, in the day that it went up, we came into work the next day and everything on the menu had gone up by 15 cents. So we got a whopping 50-cent per hour raise. And with one fell swoop, that was wiped out by a combo purchase, pretty much. Then you go to the store, everything else, cheese that was 99 cents before was $1.15. Funny how that always works. This isn't about slogans. This is about trade-offs. That is the debate Oklahoma voters are going to have. And again, for those of us who like to say over and over again, don't California my Oklahoma, just going to say, I don't think forcing minimum wage up is the right idea. I think we need to find ways to make businesses more profitable again. We need to find reasons for those profits to be passed down to its employees so that companies don't feel like they have to raise their prices. We saw this happen under Trump's first term. People were getting more money, but companies weren't raising prices. And in some cases, we actually saw prices coming back down again. There is a happy medium. There are ways to make this stuff work. But for this stuff, you can't sell it like there are no consequences that are going to happen here. This is my issue with so much of modern politics. Everything is marketed as compassion without any cost, enforcement without what amounts to trade-off, reform with no downside, spending without burden, and law without consequences. That's not governing, that's advertising. Whether we are talking about immigration enforcement in New York or a wage law in Oklahoma, the adult question is the same: what happens next? So we got to talk about this because we're going to be turning the spotlight onto what I call the circular firing squad caucus. Because now let's talk about Senate Republicans, because if we're going to spend the day pointing out Democrat dysfunction, we should be honest enough to say the Republican Party has its own special brand for stepping on its own. Anyway, so according to Town Hall's Matt Vespa, he has a rather fiery piece about Senate Republicans leaving town, delaying movement on reconciliation and DHS-related priorities, and getting tangled in fights over Trump's priorities. The anti-weaponization fund, East Wing or security funding, and the larger Senate GOP relationship with Trump. The tone of the piece is rough. Let's just say Matt was not writing that one with a lavender candle and a meditation playlist. But underneath the heat, there's a real issue. Voters gave Republicans power to govern, not to form a complaint committee with office furniture. This has been a long-running frustration on the right. Republicans campaign like fighters and govern like substitute teachers who lost the lesson plan. They send fundraising emails about the border, then hesitate when it's time to fund enforcement. They campaign against weaponized government, then trip over themselves when the solution gets politically messy. They promise action, then discover parliamentary procedure, Senate norms, and the deep emotional trauma of being asked to vote. At some point, governing means more than fundraising emails. Thomas Massey got that message loud and clear about what you would do if only you had the power, especially when you currently have some, if not all, of the power. Now, to be fair, the Senate is complicated. Majorities are narrow. Reconciliation has rules. The parliamentarian process matters. Some proposals are badly drafted. Some Trump priorities may need to be refined. Not every objection is cowardice, but voters are tired of watching Republicans explain why they cannot do the things they campaign on actually doing. I'm going to say this again, though. There's a reason that they don't talk about. If the government actually went through the process of fixing all the things that were broken so that we would stop screaming at them about all the things that were broken, they would vote themselves into a state of obsolescence, and they know that. So, and besides, if they have us angry at them and angry with each other, then we don't notice the other stuff going on behind closed doors. Democrats are trying to stop ICE. Senate Republicans are trying to stop themselves. And that is the political danger for the GOP. The base does not want excuses anymore. The base does not want a civics lecture every time something hard comes up. The base does not want to be told that Republicans would have done something. But alas, the vibes in the upper chamber were not aligned for that particular moment in time, and we're going to have to go do some hippie tree hugging. There's nothing quite like watching Republicans win power and then immediately act like someone handed them a live grenade with the pin already pulled. This also connects to the primary environment we are now seeing. PJ Media has a piece on Brad Raffensperger losing in the Georgia Republican gubernatorial primary. The piece frames it as another example of the MAGA base pushing aside Republicans viewed as anti-Trump or insufficiently aligned with the movement. Raffensperger finished third while Burt Jones and Rick Johnson advanced. Whatever you think about Raffensperger in 2020, the political signal is obvious. The Republican base is keeping receipts, and we're holding our side accountable too. You can call it loyalty politics. You can call it accountability politics. You can call it a purge, but the message is pretty clear. Republican voters are not in a mood for managed disappointment anymore. They remember who fought. They remember who folded. They remember who ran to the cameras. They remember who sounded tougher in campaign ads than they did in the office, and this is where Senate Republicans should be paying attention. Trump's influence in primaries remains very strong. Voters are more willing than ever to replace incumbents, and the old model of say the right things at CPAC, then go back to Washington and slow walk everything, it's not aging very well. Your base, ladies and gentlemen, and you are the base, you guys are asking for results. They haven't been delivering. That does not mean every Trump-backed idea is perfect. Far from it. It does not mean Congress should have a rubber stamp. It does not mean senators should stop thinking. Do they think so? Anyway, but it does mean Republican politicians need to understand the mood of their voters. The right is not simply asking, are you conservative anymore? It is asking, are you doing the things that we asked you to do? And that's a very different question. Because if you're not, then you're not useful any longer, and voters will eventually go shopping. All right, so we're down to like 13 minutes. I think we can get through what I have left. So here comes the blue check Twitterati, and we're finding out a lot of those folks may not actually be real, which was the whole point of the blue check in the first place. So that's interesting. So now back to California, where the politics are fake and the accounts are fakes, and the cost of living is very, very real. According to Red State's Jennifer Oliver O'Connell, in a piece that she put out earlier today, the California's governor race and accusations surrounding Xavier Becerra and Tom Steyer. According to the piece, more than 3,000 fake accounts across Instagram, X, and Facebook allegedly boosted Becerra while attacking Steyer. Based on an analysis by Sibra. The same piece also details influencer disclosure issues involving Steyer's campaigns. And this is almost too on brand. California politics has become so synthetic that even Lisa Rinna's lips have questions. Have you seen her? Dude, I've told you this before. I grew up watching Days. My grandma got me into Days when we spent summer there, and when she lived in Alabama back in the days when, you only really had 3 channels. So I kept watching it. And then at one point, they killed off Hope, who's now been back from the dead like 14 times. They've also killed off and or replaced the guy playing Bo about as many times. But at one point, he was actually involved with a woman who was playing the character Billy Reed, who happens to be Lisa Rinna. As a junior high school kid, voom. But have you seen the picture of her lately? I'm not putting it on the screen because I don't have time, because we're doing the speed round because I ran out of time. But yeah, she looks like Cruella DeVille with much bigger lips. Anyway, so yeah, speaking of synthetic. So again, the politics in California have become so synthetic, even the grassroots appear to come with a login sheet. The people who warn you about misinformation apparently just outsourced democracy to a bot farm and a TikTok contract. Now, we got to be careful. The analysis described in the piece reportedly alleges coordinated online activity, but it does not necessarily prove who controlled all of it. That distinction still matters. We do not need to overstate the claim to see the problem. The problem is that modern politics is increasingly built around the illusion of momentum, not actual momentum. Campaigns do not just want voters, they want the appearance of a movement. They crave that. They want the engagement. They want the clips. They want creators. They want viral moments. They want the sense that everyone is suddenly saying the same thing. And it's not just politics. Have you seen media lately? If the organic support is not naturally there, apparently there are consultants, influencers, fake accounts, and coordinated campaigns ready to help nature along its path. That is what we call astroturf politics. And astroturf politics is dangerous because it manipulates social proof. People are very social creatures. If they think everybody's talking about a candidate, they become more curious. If they think a candidate is surging, they may take that candidate more seriously. If they see an opponent getting hammered from every direction, they may assume something real is happening. But what if none of that is actually real? What if the grassroots energy is a paid creator campaign? What if the outrage is coordinated? What if the consensus is actually manufactured? What if the viral clip is less the people have spoken and more, hey, the check cleared? This is where this gets bigger than Becerra and Steyer. This is the future of politics, unless voters get much more skeptical. AI will make fake consensus much easier. Bots will get better. Deepfakes will get cleaner. Influencer advertising will get harder to identify. Campaigns will keep using third-party, friendly nonprofits, creators, and consultants to create the feeling of public pressure. And the average voter will be standing in the middle of a digital hurricane trying to figure out what is real, what is live, and what is Memorex. This is also why the same people who say they are worried about misinformation often seem less worried when the manipulation helps their side. If the wrong people do it, it's a threat to democracy. If the right people do it, it's a digital strategy. Strategy. That's not my fault. I watched a lot of Three Stooges when I was a kid, and sometimes their word pronunciation still sneaks in. So that's not principle, that's branding. And it's not just Democrats. Republicans need to be honest about this too. Every campaign wants the advantage. Every side wants to shape perception. We saw this after the changing of the guard in the White House when Pam Bondi had the rights influencer campaign come in with their binders, making it look like there was all these things about the Epstein files that we were about to finally get to know, and it turned out to be the stack of things that we had already seen over and over and over again. And look, I get it. Tom Massey has been all over the Epstein stuff, but to me, it became an obsession. And I think part of the reason it became an obsession is he realized that if people looked too closely, he had something of his own of a bit of a scandal that happened after his wife died. I hope it was after his wife died. Because I will admit, mine didn't die. She just moved out, but that was still... So I can only imagine. But anyway. So California Democrats are giving us a vivid example of what politics looks like when authenticity becomes an optional component. A billionaire, a former HHS secretary, influencers, fake accounts, disclosure fights, jungle primary pressure. It's like somebody put modern American politics in a blender and hit ethics complaint. At some point, the healthiest thing a voter can say is, show me the receipts. Because if you cannot tell whether the movement is real, paid, automated, or manufactured, then democracy starts feeling less like government and more like a marketing funnel. All right, so as promised, we're going to try to get through this pretty quick. We got some culture closes coming up. So late night, forgot the joke, and now we finally get to our Friday fun block. And I say fun, but really what we're talking about is one of the most reliable genres in American life, entertainment. People who need an audience but appear deeply annoyed that the audience contains people who disagree with them. First up, the new Supergirl actress. I'm not sure why we need another one. Anyway, Millie Alcock gave an interview where she talked about online backlash, fan criticism, and the pressure of stepping into a major franchise. That part is understandable. Those big franchise roles come with insane scrutiny. Fans can be weird. The internet can be awful. And anonymous accounts do, in fact, know how to be cruel. But then she reportedly mocked some critics as burner accounts or people whose profiles say things like data for Christian, what she said was hilarious to her. Maybe that was meant lightly. Maybe it was just an offhand comment. Maybe she was talking about a specific kind of online critic. But as marketing strategy, let me work on that. It is a choice. Nothing sells a superhero movie quite like telling a chunk of the ticket buying public, actually, you people are hilarious to me. And this is where Hollywood still has not learned the Bud Light lesson. You do not have to agree with every critic. You do not have to pander to every demographic. You do not have to let angry fans run your creative decisions. But maybe don't mock the people who might buy tickets before the movie even opens, especially Christian dads. Do you know who takes kids to superhero movies? Dads. Do you know who buys popcorn that costs more than a used lawnmower? Oof. Dads. Do you know who sits through the trailers, the merch requests, the bathroom trips, and then still buys the Blu-ray later because the kid liked the cape? Dads. The reason I sound incredulous while talking about this is because, yeah, been there, done that. That is a very weird business model, and this blends right into the late night story. Stephen Colbert, gone from the Late Show, and Jimmy Kimmel reportedly responded by telling viewers not to watch CBS again after Colbert's finale. PJ Media's Steven Cruiser uses that moment to talk about the larger decline of late night television. Cruiser's broader argument is that late night did not just get political, it got boring, preachy, and contemptuous. It stopped trying to entertain a broad audience and started performing for a narrow political tribe. And that's the key. Everybody's comparing this to when Carson left. Carson was mostly apolitical. He poked fun at both sides and did so quite often, enough where nobody felt like they were being singled out. And let's face it, there are times when both sides deserve to be made fun of. But the problem was not that late night got political, because it's always been political. They've just usually gone both sides. The problem was that it got boring, preachy, and convinced boring and preachy was bravery. Late night comedy used to be where America went to laugh at politics. Then it became where politics went to yell at America for not laughing at their corrected storylines. And that is fatal in comedy. You can be partisan and be funny. You can be edgy and funny. You can be angry and funny. But once the audience can predict the punchline before the setup is finished, you are not doing comedy anymore. You're doing affirmation therapy for people who already agree with you. And that's kind of the thing. You can be partisan and funny to a degree. You can be edgy and funny. And I know I've said this already, but I'm driving another point home as we get ready to call it a day. You can also be angry and funny. But when you become partisan, edgy, and angry all at once, you kind of lose the funny. Colbert and Kimmel did not just mock politicians. They made half the country feel like the joke was aimed at them and they were the punchline. Johnny Carson made America feel like it was in on the joke. Colbert and Kimmel made half the country feel like they were the joke. And the audience responded the way audience respond in a free country. They changed the channel. Or more accurately, they stopped needing the channel at all. People have podcasts. They have YouTube. They have Rumble. They have clips. They have streaming. They have video games. They have audiobooks. They have real books, which aren't even really talked about in my notes, but they do still exist. They have the ability to watch a man pressure wash a driveway for 47 minutes, which in some cases, depending on how badly that goes, can be more entertaining than Colbert, and somehow feel more entertained than watching a millionaire explain why rule voters are a bunch of fascists. YouTube did not kill late night. Late night wandered into traffic wearing a resistance hat. Okay, so this is going to bring us back to Oklahoma real quick, and then we do got to go because I'm back on in an hour for the Weekend News Roundup. Oklahoma has led its own version of the media funding fight with OETA. Governor Kevin Stitt vetoed legislation continuing OETA, objecting to publicly funded broadcasting. Oklahoma Voice reported the state Senate later fell short of the votes needed to override the veto. Now, look, I have someone who I've come to consider a mentor and actually a bit of a friend who works at OETA. And I understand how bad this can be. But my problem is this. PBS as a whole is broken. It doesn't do most of what it used to do. It is now pushing a lot of narratives and everything else. And I'm not saying that's the case for all of OETA, especially the folks that do the local news there. But I will say this. When a group has licensing rights to merchandise that would make the rest of us be able to retire and buy an island, and they're still screaming about 15% of their budget coming from the federal government. That's poor management. So a lot of people have strong feelings about public broadcasting. I happen to be one of them. Some people grew up with it. Again, I happen to be one of them. Some people value educational programming, and I did and still do, except for now it seems to be pushing a lot of narratives. Some people see it as a public good, especially in rural areas. Those arguments do, in fact, deserve a hearing, but the broader question is unavoidable. In a media world with more choices than ever, what should taxpayers be required to subsidize, especially when our country's broke? If media can't survive without taxpayers, maybe the problem is not democracy. Maybe the problem is the programming. And again, this fits the theme. Institutions that once had captive audiences now have to earn their trust again. They have to earn attention. They have to earn relevance. Hollywood has to earn ticket sales. Late night has to earn viewers. Public media has to justify public money. Politicians have to earn votes. Courts have to maintain legitimacy by following law instead of becoming political activists in robes following political pressure. The audience is not obligated to applaud people who despise them. That may be the single biggest lesson running through the entire show today. Voters are not obligated to reward parties that lie to them. Viewers are not obligated to watch hosts who lecture them. Moviegoers are not obligated to fund studios that mock them. Citizens are not obligated to trust officials who change the rules every time the rules get inconvenient. The audience, especially today, has options, and the audience is starting to use those options. So just to recap, in Virginia, Democrats lost a court fight over redistricting process, and some of them responded by targeting the court instead of respecting the process. The DNC released an autopsy of 2024 that appears to do a bit of a pole dance around one of the most obvious causes of the political wreckage, Joe Biden's age and the party's effort to shield the public from that. Not only his age, but his mental incapacity. Iranian officials are reportedly talking about assassination bounties while Rubio is at NATO, reminding allies that alliances have to work for everyone involved in those alliances, not just America with the checkbook and them holding out their hands. The Supreme Court reopened the door for Havana docs to pursue claims tied to property seized by the Castro regime, reminding us that communism may take the docks, but sometimes the receipt still survives. New York is trying to restrict cooperation with ICE, while some local officials say they will keep working with federal enforcement anyway. Oklahoma voters are about to weigh in on State Question 832 and the state minimum wage. They will also face State Question 845 and the question of how judicial selection should work in the future. Senate Republicans are proving that winning power and using power are two very different skills, and they don't really seem to have the second one very well. California politics is giving us fake accounts, paid influencers, and AstroTurf energy with a blue check, and Hollywood and late-night television are reminding us that audience is allowed to leave. And that's the theme today. The rules matter, the process matters, the truth matters. Enforcement matters, trust matters. And when people in power treat all of those things like obstacles, the rest of us should, in fact, take notice and maybe jot down a few notes. Because the system does and should keep receipts, and so do and should the voters. That's it for today's show. Have a great weekend. With everything that's going on with the missing kid, make sure you hug your people. Check the fine print for anything that you're looking into today. And don't trust every trending hashtag. And if Hollywood mocks Christian dads again, remember, Christian dads control the minivan, the debit card, and the popcorn budget. We'll see you next time. I will be back in a little less than an hour now for the Weekend News Roundup. My name is Rick Robinson. This has been my show, but we got to go. So, bye, everybody. Thanks for hanging out. And don't forget, I'll be back in less than an hour for the Weekend News Roundup, live right here on KLMradio.com. Then back with He Said, She Said later tonight at 8:30. Say goodnight, Gracie.